Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the second last update to the Canadian federal election forecast 2021. So, we are getting to the end, the coattails of the election, the last final days, the drawing twilight. And it's almost likely, certainly we're going to have another election within 9 to 18 months. Success. Good job, Trudeau. Now, what has changed between this between this update and the last update? Not a lot. NDP lost a seat in Saskatchewan. Conservatives lost a seat in Ontario. Liberals gained the seat in Ontario, and as you can see, Conservatives gained the seat in Saskatchewan. And New Brunswick is now firmly in the plus 40, not the plus 40, that's a bad way to phrase it, in the 40% plurality column, 40 to 50% plurality column for the Liberals. This doesn't really affect seat projections, though. It makes St. John's Rothesay a bit safer, but it's still in play. Same with Miramichi. Fredericton's not that much in play, but it's potential. Depends on how wrong polling in Atlantic Canada is, which I'll get to in a second. So, where are we here? So, Liberals have an projected 11 seat lead, which, in other words, is the Liberals losing 10 seats from the last election. So what does this mean? Well, the Liberals and the NDP would have 172 seats together. So they would barely have confidence. Maybe the Bloc would give them confidence in some issues. Unlikely the Conservatives would ever give them confidence on issues. What this really means is if 3 members of the Liberals ever miss a vote, either they die, they retire, they are busy with their actual job, such as cabinet ministers or the prime minister who's away doing things importantly, such as foreign diplomacy when a confidence vote happens, or, they just otherwise miss the vote. Maybe they're sick. The government would collapse. If 3 backbenchers are like, nah, fuck Trudeau, the government collapses. If Singh loses control of his backbenchers, the government collapses. If Trudeau doesn't kowtow to Singh, the government collapses. Alternatively, you could kowtow to Blanchette, but those are really 2 options. Basically, it will be impressive if Trudeau manages to pass a subsequent budget with this parliament, if it's this projected thing, this projected seat totals. I think it's pretty safe to say he will succeed in the throne speech. I don't think the NDP will have the finances or the appetite to immediately veto a government. And if so, that would just mean the Conservatives will get a chance, and that would be even less likely to get a budget passed, because the Conservatives would need both the NDP and the Bloc, or the Liberals, to support their budget. Very unlikely. So we will almost certainly, in this case, a Conservative government with this seat total would almost certainly see an election next budget. I don't see O'Toole able to pass a budget that makes the NDP and the Bloc happy. And the Conservative backbenchers, I should note. Because that's not a given. The backbenchers could always revolt if the budget is too left-wing. Trudeau has a chance, but it would be very tight. He doesn't have much room to wiggle with. And it's very unlikely he could get 2 budgets passed. And it's almost certainly very little legislation will get passed in this parliament. So all this to say, if this is the seat total, we will see an election again really soon. Success. It's very glad we've had this election. It's best time to have unstable government in the middle of a pandemic. So, that said, there is some huge question marks on these seat totals, and it'll be better to see in, oops, that's the wrong spreadsheet, this one. It'll be easier to see here. So if we look over here, the NDP is projected at 17.4, and the People's Party is projected about 3.2%. Now, these two numbers right here, and to a lesser extent the Greens at 2.3, represent the big 3 asterisks on this election. I will vouch for these numbers. I feel confident in these numbers. That is why I'm projecting them in this model. But they're a huge asterisk, especially the People's Party one, because we only have one election to go off of their support. So my model takes polling data in. And then it takes historical voting trends in area. It takes demographics in the various ridings. And it takes historical polling error into account. Now, a lot of historical polling error is strategic voting. It's not the polls being wrong per se. It is people strategically voting in the polling booth, though there is also polling error involved. The question here are the numbers of strategic voters in past elections going to be as high as this one? Or are they going to be higher? It could go either way. If NDP voters, for example, or Green voters, are extremely dissatisfied with Trudeau, they might not strategically vote for him. If they think he's useless and doesn't do whatever they like, progressive things, they might be so apathetic they don't care if a conservative government wins. In which case, this NDP and this Green number will be a lot larger, and conversely, this Liberal number will be a lot smaller. Similarly, we only have one election for the People's Party to forecast this on, so this one has a gigantic error bar on it. Based on the last election with the People's Party, 2019, we have the tentative estimate that approximately 49% of people who say yes to People's Party on their polls, actually vote or don't vote for them. Either they strategically vote, they don't vote, or something else. Or the polling is wrong. Those are the 3 options. Maybe that is completely wrong in this election. With 49%, or only 51% of supporters voting, we're about 3.2. If 100%, that'd be about 6.4. You could double all these numbers. The People's Party would pull out a seat in Nova Scotia, for example. Probably. But that's not for certain. It could be lower? Probably not. It could be higher. The number who actually vote. But we don't know. There's nothing to forecast this on. So there's a huge asterisk here. Similarly, I believe the Greens have a 20% of Green supporters in polls don't end up voting for the Green Party, and it's about 17% for the NDP. Those numbers could be smaller. I see many reasons why they could be smaller this election. My model obviously cannot forecast that because no one actually polls that question, because how would you poll that question? How do you ask a voter in a poll, are you actually going to vote for that party on the polling day? You can ask them how likely they are going to vote, and if they did, that would remove a lot of this error. But not enough pollsters in Canada ask the question how committed you are to voting. So it's very hard to ask that to, let's wait for this. It is very hard to figure out, or to remove that from the error bar, because that question is not asked in polling enough. A few firms ask it. Abacus occasionally, not even every update in Abacus, just occasionally, and Abacus has its own biases, and one polling firm with its biases is not an adequate sample. It will be a bad. You would be removing one bias for another. You need at least really 3 or 4 pollsters polling with a data type to really remove a lot of the biases from it. The more the better, but one would not be enough, especially with how infrequently Abacus actually asks that question. Strategic voting is also not something that's very easy to see because most strategic voting happens in the ballot booth. People go in on a bit on the fence and then they bite the bullet in the polling booth. Sorry, ballot box. So that's not an easy question to ask because people don't really know they're going to strategically vote until they do. Or, sorry, they do know, like deep in their mind, but they don't. Like, you can't ask them, if that makes sense. Like, it's one of those things that until it happens, the person doing it is not 100% committed to it. So asking them is meaningless until they're committed to it. That gets a bit into the weeds, but that is where surprises could come in. It's these 3 parties, in my particular model, is the assumptions of previous trends, and for the Greens and the NDP, this is trends from the last 5 elections, so it's not insignificant number of trends. Number of elections are going on. People's Party, it's 1 election, so it's not a great number of trends to go by. So there's big asterisks on these numbers, and by proxy these ones, because Conservatives and the Liberals are the main beneficiaries. I think a lot of the Conservative benefit is some of it is strategic voting, possibly. Unlikely. I think most strategic voting goes to the Liberal Party historically because of the political parties that exist. What the Conservatives really benefit for is every other party has generally less voter commitment, but again, the polling doesn't happen frequently enough and with enough pollsters to really model that. But Conservatives typically have a much higher voter commitment rate, so they generally get a ballot box bounce because they actually have more people vote. More of their supporters vote than other parties, historically. There's no reason that's not going to happen. There's also the well-documented effect that in a lot of polls, particularly the type Nanos conducts, where they ask voters with a live telephone call, there's a well-documented effect that makes people who have political beliefs that are not seen as, for lack of a better term, socially acceptable, are less likely to answer truthfully. And considering all the media and cultural environment is pretty anti-conservative, even some lukewarm conservatives could be made uncomfortable and not truthfully say their voting intentions, which does put big asterisks on polling firms like Nanos, which is why historically Nanos typically underpolls the conservatives. It's one of the reasons. I don't think it's systemic error on their part. It is just the truth of having a live telephone call with somebody. So there's a lot of asterisks going into this. Yes, the Conservatives are leading by 2.3 in my forecast. That could be a lot more. That could be a lot less on election day. I don't normally compute error bars with this model right now, not because I don't believe in the error bars, but because I didn't think to write the code to do it before, and I've spent all of the time that I would write code to fix this election, just putting in polls. It's very time consuming to do so. Cannot understate this. It is very time consuming to enter polls into your poll to spreadsheet format. But generally speaking, The error bars here, you can probably consider a 5% plus or not percentage points, like multiplicative 5%. So we move this over a bit, put there, and then we go, yeah, the live Excel spreadsheets. Isn't this exciting? There we go. So these numbers aside are what I would normally consider the error bars, if the assumptions of the model hold. One of the assumptions, as I stated, is that historical trends in polling error, be it because of strategic voting, ignoring voter commitment, or just methodological errors, as some of examples I've already said, assuming that that historical trend holds true and historical provincial biases hold true, these would be the error bars. Obviously, those could be wrong, and if I were to bet money on where I'm most likely to get errors, it would be one of those two. And I can always go into this after the election when we have all the data in, I can sit down and do the numbers. The only limiting factor then would be, do I have another election pop up in the short term that would derail my video scheduling? But assuming that doesn't happen, that would be the plan. Dissect it and then adjust the model accordingly. But that is where we are on this. So it looks like, if we go back here, that the Liberals have a solid lead, but there's actually quite a bit of uncertainty here. I don't do percentages normally because I don't think they're meaningful, because you cannot calibrate them, you cannot verify them, you cannot check them. I could say the Liberals have a 99% chance of winning, the Conservatives could win, and I'm not wrong. You can't prove that I'm wrong. So it's meaningless in that regard, since you cannot show I am wrong, because a 1% chance is still an outcome that can happen. So it happening should not be something that you would be surprised about. But that all said, just to give you an understanding, because obviously because of the limitations of this, I've not been able to really make a nice riding level map. One day that will exist, but don't hold your breath. That requires much more effort than I have time to write code for. Mostly because I don't have a map already. So just one note there. To create a riding level map would require a riding geographical map that's satisfactory, and I haven't found one that I can use, and I don't have the time to make one myself. And when I say to use, I mean like this default image here is not, I did not make this map, as it's all in my every video description I have. I am using this map under fair use license. I just changed colors and changed numbers and stuff. But I didn't draw the map, if that makes sense. And I don't really have time to draw a riding level map because that would take forever. That's a lot of boundaries that I have to draw. But one day that will happen. One day. Don't make any promises, one. But since that doesn't exist, to give an impression of the volatility of this, because there's about 30 to 40 seats that are reasonably in play, especially if we go back here for a second. Like, within these error bars, especially on Liberals and Conservatives, there can be as many as 50 or 60 seats in play if you're talking about one party's at the bottom of theirs and the other party's at the top. Like, if the Conservatives end up getting, like, what would that be? 38, 37 and a half-ish. And the Liberals end up getting about 32-ish. Then you would expect to see probably in the realm of like 20 pickups by the Conservatives, maybe 30. And the NDP would make its pickups, and the Bloc would make some pickups. Conversely, if you flip the numbers, then it would be about 20 Liberal pickups. So, and some NDP and some Bloc. So there is a lot of seats that are actually in play. So with that in mind, I think it's probably in the realm of like, right now, 60-40. 60% chance for the Liberals, 40% for the Conservatives. That seems to be about where it is, assuming all of the model assumptions hold. And now I'm going to address one here that I think doesn't hold, but I cannot, there's no point in correcting this because I have no way to baseline this, if that makes sense. Like, I cannot correct this assumption because first off, I don't want to correct any assumptions that I think are wrong, because there's a couple that I think I need to tweak, but there's no point in tweaking them until I have an election to compare against, or else I'm blindly tweaking, and that doesn't mean anything. Or not doesn't mean anything, but it's not very useful. But there is one particular case where I think there is a model assumption that doesn't hold, and that's Quebec. Specifically, regional bias for Quebec. So I do have, my model does consider regional biases for all of the territories and all the provinces, which is roughly based off of historical voting trends. The TLDR of this is basically, historically, the province is like this, so barring anything major, you'd expect it to be like this. The difference here is I think this is completely underestimating Conservative seat pickups in Quebec. So specifically, I don't normally bring out the raw data, but I'm going to bring out raw polling data here. So we scroll down. This is for Quebec. This is Quebec. We're going to make this smaller window, and we're going to put this in behind. It'll be more interesting. So, what do we have here? So, the last several days, almost all of the polls have been well above 20, with only with only Nanos really reporting under 20. So, we close that. We go back to this. What do I have here? This is a 20. All of the polls are forecasting the Conservatives well above 20. There's reasons to believe that polls generally underestimate Conservative vote, but because of regional biases that I have set in, the Quebec numbers are quite lower than 20, are about 20, within rounding error. I don't want to change the model's assumptions until the election day, because first off, it's only 3 days away as of the recording of this video, because yes, I am recording again in the middle of the night. But I am doubting the validity of that assumption. Just for Quebec. I feel confident everywhere else, except Quebec on this. And that's because Quebec is the only region that seems to be showing such significant divergence election over election. Every other region's roughly is similar. The margins are changing, but it's not so drastic as to be shocking. These numbers for the Conservatives in Quebec are shocking. A poll, if they're getting 22-23% in Quebec, that would be nearly a 50% increase in support there. That would be support in Quebec not seen by the Conservatives for since probably the before the Bloc. Obviously, Mulroney had like over 50% support in Quebec, but I don't think there's been a single election under the the Federal Conservative Party where the Conservatives got 20% in Quebec. In fact, I'm just going to do a quick check. I think 2006 was their best record for Quebec. Okay, that was 24.6. Sorry. So they had one election where they got well above 20, like 24.6. And there's there's reason to believe that if those numbers are correct, they should be getting around 24.6, maybe 25, maybe 26 in Quebec. And if that's the case, there might be several seat pickups here. There might be a lot. 6%, gaining 6 percentage points, roughly at the cost of Liberals in the Bloc, would cause many Conservative pickups, probably 6, 7. And that alone would turn this from a minor 11-seat lead for the Liberals to a dead tie. Maybe my model's correct, and maybe it's better than I think it is. Maybe the polling is completely wrong in Quebec here. But I'm not so certain, because this is the only province where it's so divergent. And there's many reasons I've said in previous videos where I expect Quebec to be going more conservative going forward because of things like immigration, and cultural pro-assimilation policies, pro-decentralization policies, pro-anti-immigration policies. Well, it's not strictly anti-immigration, but like reduced immigration, if that makes sense. Like it's a bit hard to phrase that there. There's a lot of reasons why culturally I believe Quebec is shifting right. I didn't quite expect it to be happening right now, but with popular premiers like François Legault endorsing a conservative government, that might be the catalyst. We don't know. Obviously, we don't know the election day. The poll could be wrong. The polls could even be underestimating conservative support in Quebec. Again, I don't know. But I'm putting this as a word of caution there. If you are a conservative voter, or you just don't like Trudeau, this forecast of 11 seats lead for Liberals is not necessarily true. It really depends on if the polling support in Quebec for the Liberals, for the Conservatives, the model's forecasting, is correct, which basically means, or a better way to phrase this, is this model presumes there hasn't been a paradigm shift in the electorate. But polling is suggesting there might have been a paradigm shift in Quebec, which I'm seeing as a flaw, that my model doesn't handle that very well, but there's, or at least I don't think it necessarily handles it very well, but since I don't have an election to verify that, who knows? Maybe it actually does. We don't know. There's not been an election yet. But keep an eye out on that. Quebec could go a lot bluer than we all think it will. And that could change the election. So with that said, is O'Toole done? Not necessarily. Can Trudeau sit home happy? Definitely not. And all of this comments about Quebec, to a degree, hold true with Atlantic Canada, not because I think there's a paradigm shift here, but because I think the polling in Atlantic Canada is completely terrible. The inconsistency, poll over poll, on Atlantic Canada is comical. The only region that gets equally bad is Saskatchewan and Manitoba. But unlike Saskatchewan and Manitoba, where it's pretty easy to filter out because there's really no reason to believe Saskatchewan and Manitoba have had a major paradigm shift. At least for me, I've not heard any anecdotes, I've not heard any reasons why Saskatchewanese or Manitobans would suddenly like the Liberals more. I know plenty of personal anecdotes of people in Atlantic Canada, and Nova Scotia in particular, who really do not like the Liberals anymore, and we have the recent Nova Scotia election to put more emphasis that it seems rural Nova Scotia was polled really poorly. It was completely missed. Rural Nova Scotia went very blue in the provincial election, and everyone was forecasting that the Liberals would win, and they lost by a lot of seats. Not necessarily a lot of votes, but a lot of seats. But the polling is complete chaos. Some polls huge leads for the Liberals, some polls huge leads for the Conservatives, some minor leads. It seems like it's settling with, if we go here, back here for a second, I'm not going to go into the raw data, but it seems to be settling at around this margin of 10-ish, which I will note is a significantly lower margin than 2019 for the Liberals. But again, that could be wrong. Depends on the polls. And the polls in Atlantic Canada were recently very wrong. So, big asterisks again. It is important to reiterate or to emphasize. I trust the model would be right, is correct. Assuming the data is correct. I'm not so certain about the data in Atlantic Canada. The data in this half of the country, I'm pretty confident in, minus some pruning. Data here doesn't seem coherent. It does not seem there's much disagreement. It's just very different. It would imply a paradigm shift in Quebec if the polling in Quebec is correct. But there's no major disagreement here. The polling here has huge disagreement, pollster over pollster. Wild disagreement. And I don't really know why. I don't know how. I don't know what they're doing. So, all of this to say, to wrap up here, that yes, the Liberals are leading. But are they actually going to win? Not necessarily. I would watch on election day. I think we will have a good understanding of the model, how accurate this is, by the time the polls close in Ontario. If Nova Scotia's sitting roughly at a 10-point lead for the Liberals, or not Nova Scotia, sorry, Atlantic Canada is roughly 10-point lead for the Liberals, it looks like the model's correct. If it's suddenly way bluer or way redder, looks like there's major polling error. But otherwise, if you liked the video, please like, share, subscribe, comment if you have seen anything in your local areas that would make you doubt results in particular. I always find those comments very interesting and nice to read. Anecdotes are not useful for modeling, anecdotes may not be modeled in data, but they are very useful for understanding regions, so all that stuff is always very interesting to read, and I always appreciate it. And, let me know below. Do you think the Conservatives can pull this out still? They're behind in the seats. They're still leading in the popular vote because of obvious derpiness that these two regions are very underrepresented and these ones are very overrepresented. To a certain extent, these are overrepresented, but not nearly as bad as like PEI. Heck, even Nova Scotia, I think, has two more seats than it should have by proportional representation. So, otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you on Sunday or Monday morning, depending on when I release the next video. This will be released at the 1 p.m. time. Otherwise, I said that 3 times now. Have a good evening or day.